So good morning, everyone. I'm a little bit of an unusual suspect to attend the Congress, so I have to thank Doug for throwing me in with this crowd. I'm very much a water guy, but I sit in the world of water in what I would say is a fairly unique space. Doug asked me to talk about this magical thing called innovation. So I will talk about what I do for a living with the business sector, and also focusing on innovation and what that means. I'll talk a little bit about public sector innovation, but I don't pretend to be an expert in that piece of the puzzle. So the tree means a lot. So I do my work mostly for US and non-US multinationals that need water for their business. So you've heard no water, no beer. Well, it's no water, no anything, essentially. And you see leading companies increasingly focus on water as a critical resource to maintain business continuity and business growth. So they want to be on the right side of the tree, not the left. I also believe growth is critical to create abundance. We tend to talk about scarcity, the drought, perish the thought, but we don't talk about what we can do to ensure universal access to safe drinking water and water for economic development and business growth. And that's where I fit in the scheme of things. Doug also indulged me in showing this picture, and I use it allegedly as my background slide. Where did I start my career? I really just show it because this is when I was younger and thinner. That's me in the middle. So I started my career as a hydrogeologist, working for Garrity and Miller. It's my first water supply project in Puerto Rico, and spent really the early part of my career working for private sector companies, water supply projects, Superfund programs, and then got into strategy. And what does that mean? That means that I was called upon to help companies think about water as a strategic resource to fuel business growth and ensure business continuity, to help them with mergers and acquisitions. And the two books on the right sort of bracket my point of view on water as a critical business issue. I'm not sure how many people here are from the business sector. I'm willing to bet not many, but the sector is really, really important in this conversation about water supply and water demand scenarios. So why water? From a business perspective, this is pretty much it. And this is an estimate of what we will need with respect to water, energy, and food. This assumes business as usual. Our challenge, though, is to ensure that we do not persist in business as usual, because these numbers are daunting. I'm not sure how we supply increasing energy, water, and food to an increasing population, increasing business demands, increasing demands from the public sector, and even nature. So when I talk to the private sector, these are four lousy arguments that I typically get, and this is the challenge. And none of these will seem terribly new to you, but it's an interesting conversation, at least a starting point, in getting them to think differently, that water is fundamental to whatever they do. Water's cheap, it doesn't cost much. Compared to others, we don't use much. We get water when we need it, and our impacts are small. Quite frankly, no one cares about any of these arguments in the scheme of things. But nevertheless, that's how we view water. It's either cheap, free, and it always shows up when we need it. The new normal. We're all talking about the drought. I'll refer to it as the new normal in the scheme of things. So the bad news, from my perspective, is public policy, because it's not evolving fast enough to keep up with what's happening in the 21st century and increasing demands for water. Just slow to evolve in the scheme of things. There's the energy, food, water nexus. We can't think of water in a silo anymore. And there was some of the conversation this morning that touched on that. Water for ag. We didn't talk about water for power. Water for manufacturing. You can't do anything without water. And we have an aging last century infrastructure in this country. Unfortunately, that's not unusual. So these are some of the big challenges. I'm an optimist, so I tend to focus on the good news, the right side of this slide, which is digital innovation changing our relationship with water. So data acquisition and analytics give us the ability to use a gallon or a liter of water more efficiently and more effectively. Nexus solutions, if you think about energy, water, food together, that drives innovation. And then there's a move for off-grid solutions or localized treatment. And I'll show you some examples. So the bad news drives the good news on the right, and innovation really sits in the right side here. Water risk and economic development. This is a report from the World Bank taking a look at the impact of water scarcity, drought, influenced by climate change. And the punchline here is that they predict that certain parts of the world will see a negative 6% hit to their GDP in the next several decades. So if you want to think about the importance of water, you really need to think about its role in driving economic development and business growth. And if you have trouble funding projects, think about what would happen if you didn't have water, what it would mean for your economy or for your business. The same thing applies to businesses. A good friend and I, a number of years ago, we looked at major growth projections for multinationals, food and beverage companies in particular, and they were predicting they were going to grow 100% the next several years. The bulk of that growth was going to be in emerging markets. Well, if you look at emerging markets in India, Africa, China, or Latin America, those are the places that are water stressed and water scarce. So how are they going to grow when water is scarce? And that's a good way to get them to think differently about making different investments in how they manage water and how they collaborate in partnership with the public sector or NGOs. So when businesses think about water risk, and I would argue that this applies to the public sector as well, they look at it across three dimensions. The physical risk is, do I have enough water of the right quality when and where I need it right now, and what might it be going out a number of years? They look at regulatory risks. What are the regulations right now? How am I positioned to comply? How might those regulations change in the next several decades? Will it hurt my business? What do I need to do to comply? What's the cost of compliance? And reputational risk. This is my personal favorite. Anyone with a Twitter account or a social media account is now a stakeholder, and they could comment on how well you manage their water. And this is particularly important for a food and beverage company or a consumer product goods company or a mining company, anybody. That is a really critical risk that could shut down your business on a temporary basis or shut it down completely to where you have a stranded asset. And companies look at those three risk dimensions across their value chain, their supply chain, their operations, and product use. So if you're making soap and you're trying to sell it in a part of the world that doesn't have water, you have a bit of a problem. And then they roll all this up into some economic value, and that gets us beyond the price of water and gets companies to start thinking differently about how to manage water. So innovation. This is one of my favorite quotes. I don't know if you've seen this before. It's from a science fiction writer. Basically, the punchline here is that the future has arrived. So for us to look at innovation, it's out there. It's just not evenly distributed. In the utility sector, it's really interesting. There are some utilities that have embraced AI solutions. It's embedded into their business. They're managing assets through digital technologies, and others are not. So it's just pretty lumpy in the scheme of things. So what is innovation? Innovation is not just technology. You can innovate with respect to partnerships. And I love this slide. I don't know if any of you have heard about an organization called 10-10-10. It's based here in Denver. It's 10 wicked problems, 10 entrepreneurs for 10 days. And the program brings together 10 successful entrepreneurs that know nothing about a topic that can bring in a fresh perspective to water or healthcare. Last year, they ran a 10-10-10 infrastructure and water program, and they had a couple of water technology companies spin out. based here in Denver, and I'll get to those later. But the interesting part of this slide is that no one stakeholder group owns innovation. We all need to participate in this journey to do better with a resource that's absolutely critical. So entrepreneurs have a very small impact at scale, but they're really fast, they're really creative, they drive innovation. New ideas show up on a minute-by-minute basis. It's fascinating. The public sector has enormous scale, but they innovate very slowly for a lot of good reasons and a lot of bad reasons. And multinationals sit somewhere in between depending on who the company is. Well, you can't solve water with one of these stakeholders. Every one of these groups has a role to play, and what 10-10-10 does is bring them all together to really come up with new approaches to solve water quality, water quantity, infrastructure, whatever it may be. Another driver for innovation is this energy, water, food nexus. So scarcity does drive innovation. If you don't have something, you figure out how to get it. And there are a number of examples. I'll talk about the top one. There's a water technology accelerator based in San Francisco called Imagine H2O. And they run a prize competition every year. And for a couple of years, they've run this Nexus Prize, and they're looking for water technology or technology startups that are focused on solving not just water, but energy and water, or food and water. And they spin out companies that they nurture, and hopefully with enough support, not just financial, they scale and they can solve a problem. So prize competition is a big deal. I'll get into that a little bit later. There are examples of joint incentives between power and water utilities. Cross-industry, I think, is a really interesting example. This is EDF out of France that signed agreements with the ag sector to ensure that there was enough water for hydropower and enough water for food production. And then water funds, I'll get into SAB Miller. There's a little bit of an alcohol theme you'll see in terms of innovation here that I'll get to in a little while. So prize competitions. This is really powerful. So if you want to bring people in that are outside the water sector but are incentivized to come up with new solutions because they think with a blank sheet of paper, this is it. So last year, I'll talk about Imagine H2O first. Imagine H2O, that accelerator out of San Francisco, partnered with Blue Water, which has an RO technology system, but also has an investment fund and 11th Hour Racing, which is another investment fund. And they created this Urban Water Prize. And basically what they were doing was coming up and encouraging startups to basically pitch a bunch of judges, and the result would be they would get funding to scale their business and have a bigger impact in the world. And the results were rolled out at something called Stockholm World Water Week, which is a relatively large gathering of about 3,500 people across a number of different sectors that play in the world of water and come up with solutions. So the three winners were Drinkwell, which is an innovative water ATM payment system. In India, Spout, that came out of 10-10-10, won, and it's real-time lead testing at the tap. They're based here in Denver. Worth taking a look at. And Smarterra is a water treatment technology company using AI. So companies that have great ideas but need funds, and they need people like you to help them grow. Innovative partnerships, and I'll get to technology in a few minutes. These are my two favorites. These are sort of unusual constructs. The Nature Conservancy, TNC, and Techstars out of Boulder, they have a partnership. And this partnership is based in Rhino. So again, homegrown innovation. If you want to see what innovation looks like, look at what TNC is doing with Techstars. And this past cohort of startup companies spun out a couple of water tech startup companies that are really doing some interesting things at the watershed level. AB InBev last year, 2 years ago, bought SAB Miller, the beer company. They're now the largest beer company in the world. They started ZX Ventures, which is their venture fund, to look at innovative sustainability startups that can solve their business problems, but environmental and social problems. And they had their first cohort. And it's really exciting. So what they're delivering is not just a big check, but a lot of talent that comes from being the largest beer company in the world and being a venture fund. Spout was part of that also. So you're seeing a pattern. You win a prize, you move to another opportunity, and you start to scale. Brand value creation. I bring this up because this is really important. If you want to engage the private sector in investing in water in some way, shape, or form, tie it to brand value, because they're all about selling stuff, some stuff that we actually like. So for example, AB InBev owns Stella Artois. They have a partnership with water.org. So every sale of Stella provides funding for water.org. Again, so it's this public NGO partnership to solve a complex water problem. Absolute Elix, I like a lot. I'm more of a vodka drinker than beer. So Absolute Elix is the premium vodka brand for Absolute. They have a partnership with Water for People that's based here in Denver, and for every bottle that they sell, a percentage of the profit goes for Water for People. And if you talk to Absolute Elix salespeople, business development people, they love this. They're creating brand equity, love for the brand, and they're funding a good cause. There's also funding and financing innovation. Just very briefly, there's new business models like Banyan Water, Water as a Service. Fathom provides back office services on the cloud for utilities. And then OECD and the University of Oxford are looking at something called blended finance, so high risk, low risk finance to tackle infrastructure investments. And this morning we were talking about, well, great state water plan, who pays, how do we pay? Well, you're starting to see public-private partnerships, but also innovative approaches to blended finance. Digital technology innovation, now I'll get into what I think everyone thinks is innovation. So World Economic Forum, you know, it's that great gathering in Davos, Switzerland that everyone gets to go to. And they talk about big world issues like water risk and health and climate change and so on. But they're reporting and talking about, and they have a platform on the digital revolution. So basically how digital technologies are changing everything, changing ag, changing manufacturing, and changing water. So there's one on the fourth industrial revolution and water. So it's how digital technologies, the ability to acquire and analyze and report water data and information on a real-time basis is changing our relationship with water. And these are just some companies that are playing in that digital water space, whether it's using satellite data to predict floods or improved utility asset management like Valor Water, whatever it may be. So the digital revolution is big, it's not going away, it's lumpy in terms of adoption, but it's changing water. New sources of water and localized treatment. I'm a huge fan of air moisture capture technology, so taking air moisture, capturing it, and delivering it either to an individual home or through an array to a school, an office building, whatever it may be. We were talking about building more reservoirs this morning. Well, you know, the menu's a little bit different now. Not comparing the two scales, but in terms of getting different supplies, air moisture capture is showing up and it's viable. The company on the right is Organica. It's natural treatment solutions that are localized. So instead of big, expensive, centralized water treatment systems, you now have another menu option. Again, it's not going to replace it, but it gives people a different choice. Okay, public sector innovation. I need to apologize. So this is my title slide. I've got the state of Colorado, but I'm going to talk about California, so don't throw me out. But anyway, public sector innovation, a few things that I find interesting. Again, I am a bit of a bystander. I pay more attention to how the public sector intersects with the private sector. Colorado River, a fairly important day today. I think about what is the economic value of the Colorado to the businesses that depend upon it, not just the public sector, but businesses that operate within the basin. And it's terribly important. And if there's no water, they're not doing anything, period. Or if there's less water, they're not growing their business. So that's how I come out this. California Open Data and Transparency Act, I would put this under that digital revolution. So the state of California has tens of agencies that manage water data. Historically, they've never connected to each other. The data was not readily available. I couldn't go in and readily understand what was going on across all of these state agencies. So this act mandates that all the agencies will have the ability to roll up their data and provide it to a stakeholder who wants to know how much is on the supply side, how much is on the demand side. Is this a good state for me to move to put a manufacturing plant in? Well, I don't know. They're telling me I have water. Is it true or not? So I see this as innovative. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, I can't believe that this is in the category of innovation, but lo and behold, the notion of managing groundwater in a sustainable manner is pretty innovative. It's a big deal. Again, that's what I learned when I was bailing wells and measuring water levels. Well, states are finally catching up. It's like you just can't keep taking water out of the bank. At some point, there's nothing left in the bank. So start building a plan to ensure that groundwater is sustainable over some extended period of time to ensure economic development and business growth. And then new water markets, trading, essentially. So people are dabbling in this. I have no idea how it's going to work out. But at least they're thinking that, well, maybe this is a good idea, maybe we should run some pilots. So Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency is running a pilot in Ventura. Same thing in Nevada. Again, thinking about how do we take water and move it around to where it's needed most so no one loses. It's a win-win situation. So for me, these are some of the innovative public policy things that I'm seeing, but coming at it from the private sector. And I think there's some really exciting opportunities here. I personally believe digital is transforming everything. So it's sort of like Dustin Hoffman from The Graduate, you know, plastics. I'll leave you with just digital. It's going to change everything in both the public and the private sector. So I've probably run over my time, maybe not. We're not doing Q&A, which is good for me, but here's my contact info. So I'm based here in Denver, been here a long time, almost a native, but if you want to reach me, email, call, whatever, and I'll be around for a while. So thanks for the opportunity.